Stolen Blooms Inside the Band. Links to related content can be found in the description. Amidst the Southern California rock scene, a band called Mickey Ratt began to take shape under the leadership of frontman Stephen Pearcy. After gaining local success, Pearcy moved the band to Los Angeles to capitalize on the burgeoning Sunset Strip music scene. The relocation marked a turning point for the group. We played everywhere and anywhere and became a staple in San Diego, Pearcy said. I had to start all over when I moved the band to Los Angeles in 1980. It was a culture shock, but I knew it had to be done. We'd be headlining Golden Hall, Plaza Hall, Bing Crosby Hall, and playing in front of 1,500 people, but nobody was offering us a record deal.
Jakey Lee used to be a guitar player in an early version of Ratt.
Early Ratt guitarist Jakey Lee said they were originally from San Diego when they were Mickey Ratt. After they moved to L.A., they shortened the name. Then I moved up to L.A. from San Diego about a year later and ended up joining them. At the time, Motley Crue was still the big band in town, but we were starting to headline places like the Whiskey and all the big clubs. Guitarist Robbin Crosby, another San Diego transplant, joined Ratt during this transformative period, bringing his charisma and songwriting talent to the group. Crosby said, I played a couple of shows with Jake, and then he went to do the Ronnie James Dio thing. After that, he ended up playing with Rough Cut for a while, and then got the Ozzy gig. We certainly didn't make any money in those days. We all lived in a one-bedroom apartment, ate peanut butter sandwiches, and drank the cheapest beer we could find. Jakey Lee's decision to leave Ratt stemmed from several factors, one being Stephen Pearcy's insistence that Lee adopt a glam-inspired look that fit the frontman's vision of Ratt as fashion rock. Pearcy said, metal audiences had far too many guys in them for my taste. I respected the average fat, stoned, heavy metal fan as much as the next guy. A fan base is a fan base, and they all pay for tickets. We weren't really metal when it came to how we dressed. In fact, I had started to think of us as something different altogether. Softer and sexier was the way to go. We were fashion rock. Lee famously pushed back on Pearcy's vision, saying, I told him that was the lamest sounding motto I'd ever heard before ultimately deciding to walk away from the band.
What the hell is fashion
Well,
rock?
that's what I thought you could tell me, you know.
Well, we're telling you that it's rat and roll instead.
You have to call the hotel, wake Steven up for that answer. Huh? 'Cause I ain't got it.
Pointing to other reasons for his departure from Ratt, Lee said, I felt that Stephen Pearcy was taking on a rock star attitude a little bit more than I cared for. He'd be drunk on stage and he'd announce a song that we'd already played 3 songs earlier. And then there's the fact that Robbin Crosby got in the band, because when we started, it was just me on guitar. And then Robbin moved up to L.A. maybe 6 months after I did, and he didn't know anybody else, so he'd come to all the Ratt shows and hang out. Then he started campaigning hard to get in the band. Eventually I said, okay, but just play what I tell you to play. I don't want you to get in the way. I like the one guitar thing. And he said no problem, but once he was in, things changed completely. It was, so when do I get a solo? And I was like, dude, I'll tell you what, you could take a solo whenever you can do one better than me. Now that was kind of mean, but it upset me when he changed his whole tune. So basically, Robbin was getting on my nerves because I didn't want to be in a 2-guitar band. And Pearcy was pissing me off because he was drunk all the time. At some point, I just said, I'm done.
He's like, hey, you want to come up to L.A. and play in Ratt? You know? I'm like, yeah, maybe, let me finish out this semester and maybe I can switch schools and come up there. And he's like, no, dude, you got to come up tonight.
Juan DeMartini, who also grew up in San Diego, quickly gained recognition as one of the area's most talented young guitarists. After graduating high school, he moved to Los Angeles to replace Jakey Lee in Ratt, bringing his distinctive playing style that would soon become a cornerstone of Ratt's signature sound. On how he ended up getting the gig, Warren said, Jake and Steven used to have my band Enforcer open for Ratt. Steven came up to me after a show one night and said, God forbid, if Jake ever goes to another gig or does something else, you get first shot at the gig. I said, great. Sure enough, Jake went to another gig and he let me stay at his place for about the first year I was in Ratt. I have to laugh when I think back to me sitting around playing chords that would eventually become Round and Round, while Jake would noodle around on the guitar playing riffs that would become Bark at the Moon. During a Full and Bloom interview with Bobby Blotzer, the drummer said,
March 12th of 1982 was the official day that I told those guys I would join, because I went down and checked them out a couple times in January and February at a couple gigs, and I wasn't getting my head into it, but then I saw better things and I decided to join, like I said, March 12th. Our first gig was March 28th of 82. At that time, Warren had just joined, Robbin and Steven, and a guy named Gene, I forget his last name, he was a bassist. He's a guy that designed the Dio album cover for the Holy Diver record, but he and I didn't really communicate well as a rhythm section, and that's putting it politely, but I wanted to bring Juan in. Him and I had been playing together since we were teenagers, and frankly, he had driven me down, took my kit down to Culver City, where we rehearsed in a garage. I should say they rehearsed. I had just finished an arena tour with a band called Vic Vergat, the Swiss guitar player. We toured with Nazareth around Europe and over here in the States. So I had just gotten my taste of the arenas, and then the band was over that quick, which was a bummer because I really liked playing arenas. In any case, Juan drove me down in his truck, dropped my gear off, and I started rehearsing. And first gig at the country club in Reseda, Gene had an issue, something that he took before playing the show, where I don't know what songs he was playing, but he wasn't playing the same ones I was playing. So that was our first show and our last show with him.
On his road to Ratt, bassist Juan Croucier said, there was a little magazine called The Recycler, and it was free. In the back of it, it had ads that musicians would post. So you'd find guitar player looking for rock band or band looking for drummer. So I connected with Robin Crosby and we talked a little bit. I invited him over to my apartment, and the moment he showed up, I'm staring straight ahead, and all of a sudden, I'm sort of looking at this guy's chest. I look up, and there's this guy the size of a football player with leather pants on and biker boots, just dressed to the nines. We spoke, and he played me some songs, and I played him some songs, and we sort of connected that way. Robin and I decided at that point in time, we'd stay in touch and figure out what was going on down the road. There was a lot of networking involved back then. Everything was done by just meeting and calling people and so forth. The next thing, this friend of mine at the time, Bobby Blotzer, was going to audition for a band he wanted to play in. He had been playing with my brother Tom in a band called Vic Vergat, and they had just finished touring with Nazareth. He wanted to continue playing locally, so he loaded up his drums into my truck, and I took him to Culver City and dropped him off at this audition. A couple of weeks later, he calls me up and says, "Hey, I can't play with this bass player. Can you come in and work with me on this project?" At that point in time, I was just a working musician, pretty much starving. So I said, sure, if it pays a little bit, let's do some gigs and have some fun, and maybe I can get some groceries. I learned the tracks that they had, came down and played, and then we started playing around Hollywood. When you join Ratt or you first go to see them, it sounded like in Steven's book that they were already kind of pulling decent crowds.
Well, when I joined, not necessarily. I saw them open at the Whiskey, open for Saxon. So, they were the opening band. And the other time, I think they had a gig at the Troubadour when I went down the second time. But it wasn't like, it became something much more tasty after we had the players all set in stone. And the playing of the material and the writing of the new songs was a force to be reckoned with out there for the fans, I believe. So, we started, I would say by the summer of 82, it started really getting very crowded at everything we did. But we didn't do that much, We were kind of playing once, twice a month, and we weren't leaving the state and all that kind of thing. But it started increasing, and we were doing multiple nights and that sort of thing. But there was always something going on. It felt like we were playing more because we were always uptown in Hollywood going to see somebody play.
during a full and bloom interview with DeeDee Keel, the longtime secretary and talent coordinator for the Whiskey A Go-Go, the Roxy, and the Rainbow Bar and Grill, said,
I was doing a lot of business in the office. I have some photographs of Stephen Pearcy up in the whiskey office. He used to come up and do his advertising and posters, and I'd help them out with certain things, as I did with Motley Crue. They used my office as kind of a home base. I literally had a round table. I used to call it, well, let's go talk around the round table.
During their club days in Hollywood, Stephen and Robbin would regularly meet Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neil of Motley Crue while indulging in the chaotic nightlife. The two groups shared a camaraderie born out of their ambition to dominate the rock world, often partying together and forming alliances that embodied the rebellious spirit of the era.
A few years ago, various members of Ratt and Motley Crue seemed to be in the same Hollywood street gang together. I think you were involved, weren't you, Robbin?
Gladiators. Everybody was. All of us. You know, it
Why were
was
they
really
called
more of a
gladiators?
drinking team than anything else. I mean, that was the basic gist of it.
That's it.
To get pissed and have a good time, you know.
Why were they called the Gladiators?
Hey, I don't know. Because that's what we called it. Gladiating was going out and have a drink, get in a fight, you know.
Plus, mention the fact this guy's 6'5", Nikki's what, 6'2"?
Yeah.
You know, everybody. I wasn't involved. I was too short. You know, being
We got in a
5'10".
fight one night, and that's the night that everybody got their names. I was king, and Nikki was leader, and Vince was field marshal, and it was all silly business, just for fun.
You've managed to keep that name, King. You're still you're referred to as that.
It's the truth.
King of the world.
There were a few months in early '83 that Juan Croucier wasn't in Ratt, Pearcy said. Enter bassist Joey Cristofanilli. I think Warren brought him in for the few months when Juan couldn't decide on being in Dokken or Ratt. We had done shows with Juan, and the band was kicking ass, but he wasn't convinced. Dokken had a European record deal, and we were ready to do the EP. We knew Juan was the guy.
Juan was in and out playing games. He was trying to pit us against Dokken and Dokken against us with the respective possibilities that we were both going to get signed. And it was not a fun game. And subsequently, you know, he did go with Ratt, but there was a period where Joey Chris, he's a bassist, and he was playing with us. Gosh, I don't know. It felt like about a year, maybe a little less. But when it was time to get busy and do a real record deal, Atlantic Records, full-blown production, Juan and I had played together for so long, and we were so tight. And that's not to say I wasn't with Joey, but it was a different tightness. I was comfortable with it, but it wasn't like the way me and Juan would play together. We were extraordinarily in sync. And frankly, but on the records, Bo Hill restrained both of our playing, everybody's. And I understood what he was going for with the less is more routine and approach. But when we played the stuff live, there was a lot more action going on.
On Playing with Dokken, Juan said, I started with Don Dokken early on. I think I was about 17 or 18 years old. We had a three-piece band, and we were from Redondo Beach. So it was a very difficult decision to choose between Ratt and Dokken. I had worked in Dokken for a really long time and was really invested in the band. We had finally gotten great management with Peter Minch and Cliff Bernstein, a company called Q Prime. They manage Metallica these days. Great managers and really smart guys. And we were on our way to having a record deal. Also, we had brought in Michael Wagner from Germany to produce the Dokken record. He started working with other bands and making other records with other people. And we were waiting, and that's when I began playing with Ratt. Again, there were a lot of moving parts back then. There was a time when Warren left Ratt to join Dokken, and we had to replace Warren. Mark Tureen served as his replacement, but then eventually Warren came back. During a full and bloom interview with Don Dokken, the frontman said,
George and Juan and Mick, we went back to Germany, did the TV show, did a tour there, hit the clubs, freezing our ass off in the winter, and it was rough. It was cold. And we pulled it off, spent Christmas there. We couldn't even go home for Christmas. And we all slept in hostels. And, we started out like everybody at the bottom. Came back to America. George left the band. Juan left the band, joined Ratt. So it was down to Mick and I. Signed my deal with Elektra. And then I got Warren DeMartini in the band for a short time. And George said, I want to come back in the band. And so that's, the rest is history.
Croucier continued, Cliff Bernstein and Peter Minch finally got us a record deal on Elektra, but by this time it was easy to see that George Lynch and Don didn't get along at all. I was forced by the band and management to quit Ratt, but only after we had recorded the Ratt EP. Although Don had a record deal and Ratt didn't, after finally hearing the Ratt EP finished, I took about 2 weeks and really thought about it, and finally went with Ratt because it was just a much better fit for me as a player and as bandmates. On Ratt manager Marshall Berle, DeeDee Keel said,
Let me read you what he wrote to me. He says, DeeDee Keel was always the whiskey's secret weapon. The queen of rock was responsible for putting Ratt with me, and I'm forever grateful. The best experience I ever had working with the band. 7 multi-platinum albums and still going strong thanks to DeeDee. As you know, he's related to Milton Berle.
Of course, yeah.
His uncle. He had hit some hard times. And the details of that are something that I don't want to talk about, only because it wouldn't be good for him. But he needed a job. He didn't have a job. He came to the whiskey because Elmer Valentine, at that time, we were going through a lot of struggles. It was in between, don't want to say in between genres, but we'd actually had to close the doors and become a cabaret.
Sorry to interrupt, but what year is this?
I'm thinking just 77 and 8, maybe. But anyway, back to Marshall. He comes in and, we weren't really getting the bookings that we used to get. It was a little bit tough. And he came in and needed a job, and he was real gung-ho and cool guy. And so we gave him a job, and he worked with me. He and I were the team. And I thought, you know what? He knows people in the record business. And I had just stolen Van Halen from Gazzari's. And I thought, Marshall, this band's great. And he took it and ran with it and got them signed to Warner's and became their manager. And he went off with them, but there was a lot of fishy stuff that went on, and that did not last very long.
Marshall Berle was around the scene back then, Croucier said. He worked with the Beach Boys early on, and then he was involved with Van Halen. Marshall eventually saw Ratt and became interested in managing us. As the band developed and kept working, he offered the group a production deal where he would get the band in the studio to record, and he had a record company called Time Coast at the time. Back then, things were so different. A band dreamed about going into the studio. It was sort of like getting through the gates of Oz.
At the end of summer of 82, Robbin, Steve, and I went and had a meeting with Marshall Berle up at the Whiskey, and then we had management. And that led to the formulation of doing the EP. And the EP had a backer named Mark, can't think of his last name right now, but he put the money up. It wasn't a lot. And we recorded that EP fall of 82. And came out in 83, and we toured it all through 83. It was on the radio locally on KLOS and KMET simultaneously. I guess that was a feat not easily achieved by local bands, if you will. But the EP it ended up in litigation between Marshall and Mark Leonard was his name. And somewhere between him and Marshall, he thought that he was getting half of what Marshall was making on Ratt once we hit the big time and sold all the records and all that stuff. So he's subsequently held a grudge and kept that record from being released over the last 40 years. It was re-released in 84 on Atlantic, but after that it disappeared.
The one album I think represents Ratt and our sound the best is the Ratt EP, Pearcy said. That was when Robbin and I had the same vision, and it was incredible writing those songs with him. The first song we wrote together for the EP was You Think You're Tough, and that's the song that got us radio airplay in Los Angeles and eventually got us signed to Atlantic Records.
We were in the studio on Melrose, so it was a pretty active area. We were so hungry for a record deal and so young that the EP, knowing that what was available to record it with the funds, we didn't scrutinize the deal. We were just like, whatever. Here's the ink. Here's my signature. Here's his signature. Let's get to it. But it was a vehicle. I mean, I knew all along that hopefully this will lead, and I love that EP. It was so fun making it. Led to the deal with Atlantic. So it did its job. It was a well-invested $10,000, that's for sure.
It was only like 4 or 5 days, right?
4 days. I remember we mixed it for like a day and a half. We left there Thanksgiving morning, I walked out of the studio at 9 in the morning, totally just like, oh my, I had to go to, the in-laws for, the Thanksgiving stuff and all that. I was so tired, but I was very excited. Of course, I was playing it for my brother-in-laws and anybody that would listen 2, 3, 4 times. It was kick-ass and everybody loved it. It started the next leg of the adventure.
The EP was done quickly, Croucier said. Essentially, 4 of the 6 songs on the EP are first takes. And the only reason we had to redo 2 other songs was because at one point, Warren broke a string, and we just wanted to get the whole thing live in one shot. And then the song Walkin' the Dog, we changed the arrangement at the end. I suggested we use the intro as an outro. Other than that, everything was a first take, and the one thing that was really unique about the EP is that we captured the band's high energy as well.
There was a while in the 80s when Elmer would allow me to do an afternoon showing. So I'd have a band come set up, and then I'd call my record guys and say, hey, you want to come check them out? We did that with Ratt. That's how Ratt got all those executives. They all came. If I called, they would come. They said, if she said so, we need to go look.
You set that up when they got signed to Atlantic?
That one, yes, that was mine. They offered me a finder's fee. How funny is that? I didn't take it. I didn't want it to be about that. I wanted it to be about my discovery, not about money. I didn't need money.
I had this feeling that was kind of the last chance, because I think most other labels had seen this already. And it was, I remember the feeling going on stage for that gig was that it's this or nothing.
We were opening for Lita at that date. That was at the Beverly Theater on July 27th of 83. And we were headlining the whole time. And she didn't like that, Lita didn't. And we knew that there was a lot of record company people coming down. So that was a lot of pressure, but exciting. So time's going on, and I'm asking the people that worked for us, why isn't Lita's band? What is going on? I don't know. They say she's like 40 minutes out. I go, she was supposed to be on stage like 45 minutes ago. We finally canned it, and said, no, that's it. We're just going to go out and play. And we did. And then, after, it was a great set in the hallway when we were in the dressing room. I remember poking my head out and looking around and seeing who Marshall was talking to, and just looking at guys that kind of stood out, like older dudes, dressed a little more office-y, if you will. And we entertained a few different people. I can't remember who the gentlemen were that came in, but Doug Morris, he had the best song to sing, and we wanted that record label. We wanted that logo, that Atlantic Records logo. I mean, Zeppelin, Stones, we were ready to sign just for that.